So thank you all for coming. This is the first of this year's GSO Student Alum Seminar Series, our networking series. So this is a little bit different than your standard seminar because we'll have a GSO alum talking for about half an hour about his or her career path and the work that they do, and have some time for questions. And then after that, we will just have students and alums stay on the Zoom and have discussions about their career paths. So it's a little different. So for today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this over to Rainer Lohmann, who is the major professor of our alum speaker today, Erin Markham. So Rainer, please introduce.
Thanks, Veronica. Yeah, it's a great pleasure. I didn't realize that it's 10 years ago, exactly more or less, that Erin actually joined GSO, but she was already an undergrad at URI. She had worked at the EPA, so she was present. She had research experience. She really likes to sail, and she was very good. So it was easy to say, all right, we're trying to find you something. And then we cobbled together a couple of projects that got around the world. And yes, she defended her master's in the fall of 2014. And ever since, I guess, moved across the bridge. And with that, I really want to give it over to you because I want to hear what you've been doing. So great to see you again.
All right. Thank you, Rainer. Thank you, Veronica. And thank you, everyone, for coming. I'm talking to you today about what I'm doing today. I figured I'd start kind of a little bit back before GSO, just since it's kind of, the path of how you get to somewhere. I have a pretty informal slide deck. I figured I was just going to try to more or less talk about what I've been doing since I came to Rhode Island and how I got to where I am today. So I grew up in a town called Oceanography, New York. It's about an hour north of the city. I am a very indecisive person by nature, I would say, which I'm sure that theme will continue throughout this entire presentation. I think I applied to 13 colleges, which is a lot, and ended up being really drawn to URI and to Rhode Island in general. And that's kind of when I first found myself in the state here. And went in undecided, had no major, and sort of just took a bunch of gen ed courses, was more or less drawn to the science courses. Didn't have a major by when they say you should at the end of sophomore year. So I was kind of just lumped into the College of Environment and Life Sciences and really had to choose from that branch of majors then. So I think it was spring of my junior year when I finally declared a major. I was picking between wildlife biology, which is kind of what this slide is about, and environmental science and management. And really, in just talking with my undergraduate advisor, the course for wildlife biology felt like a lot more intensive education all the way through to PhD. And not necessarily you have to do that, but just that was a track that a fair number of people took. So I ended up going with environmental science and management, and sort of in that path at URI, found myself in the NRS department, and I really loved it. That was when I first sort of got exposure to field work and to a little bit of travel, I guess. And fieldwork was in the class, and then a couple other projects. And the biggest one that I had, and the first big travel project that I had, was getting to go to Costa Rica for a few weeks. I think it was after my junior year. I'm not quite sure when it fell, but there was an ongoing research project for small mammal diversity amongst in coffee farms and then the rainforest adjacent to them. So that was my first big, trip exposure to field work. It was a nice small team, and it was a pretty cool experience. And I'm not a big coffee drinker, but good coffee. And then the other probably big trip that I did, which was more an introduction to oceanography, I would say. It was a semester at sea, but just not through SEA, which you guys are probably a little bit more familiar with. It was through a program called Semester. So just a little bit less, you still can take it for credit and can get scientific credit, but it was a little bit less focused on that, and involved scuba diving and stuff like that as well. And by the time I declared a major in my junior year, it was pretty much full tilt. I think I had to take 19 credits a semester in order to graduate in 5 years. So I squeezed this in as a 40-day mini semester at sea in the summer. And so this was in the Caribbean, it was in the Lesser Antilles, and it was sort of sailing around. It was the first time I was on a sailboat since I was a younger kid. Loved being on a schooner, loved that lifestyle. And we also had, introductory marine science and oceanography courses as well, while getting to scuba dive and be in that environment. So that was a pretty cool way to connect the dots and a really cool experience that I loved. And then there was just regular fieldwork classes at URI that were also pretty cool. I really liked the wetland side of things, wetland ecology and watershed hydrology. I worked in the watershed hydrology lab when I was an undergrad, just collecting water samples in a bunch of the streams around the area for water quality analysis, and processing some of those in the lab. And that was sort of the first job that I had, as the only job I had as an undergrad probably, but the first one that I had in the world of environmental science that I really liked. And ended up graduating finally in 2010. And from there, I did not have a plan after college. I, took 5 years in my family. It was go to college, and I really obviously not having a major, didn't have much thought after that, but really liked where I had landed, and wanted to try to stay in the area if I could. And I had a couple of friends moving to Newport, and I decided to try to look for a job around here. And I ended up sort of applying and got a summer internship research position up on Prudence Island in the Bay. And so that, if you guys aren't familiar with them, there's the National Network of Estuarine Research Reserves, or NERS, scattered all throughout the country. And then one of them's here in Narragansett Bay up on Prudence Island, with a really great small team. And they every year have seasonal positions that you can get that just give you exposure to a lot of the different work that they do. So whether it's measuring salt marsh elevation with GPS units, or taking marsh cores, or surveying the pine barrens, or surveying for ticks, you got to get my hands in all sorts of the pools that they work with. And just a little plug for them. I know I saw recently that they, I think, have a couple of postings open right now for this coming season. And they cover your ferry tickets, and you can live on the island. And I really enjoyed my experience out there. That was my first out of college job. And it was a few months, but it was a few good months. And it, if anything, just made me want to continue trying to find work in this field. So at the time that I was there, I was working on applying to a student contractor position at EPA next door. And if you guys aren't familiar with that, I think I'm assuming they still do it. I graduated pretty close to 2008, where, jobs weren't very easy to come by, especially federal jobs. So they have student contractor positions where you can either be a current student or a recent graduate within 2 years, I think it was. So it was a pretty nice grace period. And you're not a federal employee, you don't get benefits, you have to register yourself as a small business, and you're a contractor, and it's just a set number of hours. We have funding for 960 hours over the course of the year, or 1,500 hours over the course of the year. So whatever it is, sometimes it equates to 40 hours a week, and sometimes it doesn't. In my case, it didn't necessarily equate to 40 hours a week, but I was able to sort of do most of the EPA work in the winter, and then supplement it in the summer. And so that picture on the bottom is I worked as a deckhand on one of the schooners in Newport for a couple of summers full time, and then part time for a little bit after that. So before I landed at EPA, I actually had a pretty random temporary job in Newport, but it ended up being pretty relevant. I was waiting to hear on my EPA application, and was sort of just looking for anything. And I ended up finding a temporary position through, it was a staffing agency in Massachusetts, where there was an environmental engineering firm who had gotten a contract to update the mapping of the stormwater system of the naval base in Newport. So including the base itself, and then basically all of the property of the naval, of all of the Navy property from Newport all the way up to Portsmouth. And it was just field work. They needed an extra body because it was pairs of teams of 2, where we were going around and opening manhole covers and looking in the sewage drains and literally counting how many pipes were coming in and out and what material they were, and just marking it in a GPS unit. So I wasn't involved in any of the processing of that, but I enjoyed the field work. It was pretty much just walking around Newport. and on the water. So that was pretty cool. And while I was doing that, it was only about a month or two, I found out that I had gotten the position at EPA. And so that was working in the wetlands branch or division over there. So they do a lot of coastal ecology work. And I was there for 2 years. I think I had an initial contract, worked on the schooner, and then had my contract renewed for another year. And it was while I was there that I started talking to my boss at the time about what was next and deciding to try to go next door to GSO to get a master's. I definitely wasn't looking for a PhD level of commitment. But the way it was described to me is a master's is only going to help. It's not going to necessarily lock you into, one certain track like a PhD potentially might, but I decided at that point to sort of look into GSO and pursue that opportunity. And that was where I landed in the Lohmann lab, in the world of organic contaminants, which was completely new to me at the time, but something that I found really interesting. And I really enjoyed my time there and got to do a lot of really cool, be a part of really cool opportunities. So to fulfill the research cruise requirement, I was able to do a 45-day cruise at sea, I think it was. So we went from Uruguay up to Barbados. And I think the large theme of the cruise was organic matter. And then, I was on board collecting water and air samples for fluorinated compounds, but also for some legacy pollutants. So that's some processing of collecting the air samples on the left and the water samples on the right there. And from there, I was able to take all of those samples and process the oceanographic samples in the Czech Republic at Resatox, which is a really nice facility. They have an entire really nice lab work, and they study toxic compounds in the environment. So was there for the summer of 2013, I believe it was, and then came back and sort of worked on all of that data and ended up, as Rainer mentioned, defending my thesis in the fall of 2014. I think it was somewhere around Halloween. And from there, I think I was watching a couple of the old talks, and I will just interject here. And my friend Sarah Fuller said publish before you leave GSO. And that advice could not be more true. I highly second that. I recommend it. I did not think that it was going to take as long. I was like, yeah, you can get a job and you can continue the GSO work on the side. And it was way harder than I thought it was going to be. It took way more time than I thought it was going to be. And the further and further you get away from the research that you're involved in when you're there, the harder and harder it gets. And the less and less likely it gets. So second Sarah's advice, if you take away anything from this talk, publish while you're there, take the time and just try to get it done, because it's going to be 10 times harder when you leave. But we ended up getting a couple of papers out of it. Rainer, I apologize that it took longer than it did, than it should have. But all in all, a great experience at GSO. And ended up, I think, in the graduating class of 2015, but sort of finished my time there in 2014. And after I defended, I think I had one more conference to sort of present a poster at. And I was in that, I don't know how to describe it because I don't want to freak anyone out. You might have been there already, but that mode of what is next. My lease was up in Newport at the end of January. I couldn't sign a new one without having a job lined up. I didn't know what to do other than to frantically apply for all sorts of jobs. Everywhere, anywhere. So I'm pretty sure at the time I applied for a bunch. You're going to have to apply probably for a bunch. You probably won't hear back from a fair amount. But I want to say I interviewed for 3, and I was sort of on a track for 2 jobs where I got through a couple of rounds of interviews. And one of them was a research assistant position at MBL in Woods Hole. And the other was a junior hydrographer position at Leidos, which is where I am now. And before I had an offer from either of them, I was sort of trying to weigh the options. And, one of them was research. It was sort of in the worlds that I was familiar with and that I knew. And that was interesting to me. It was a little bit more towards coast ecology, so outside of the world of organic contaminants that I had been in. And then the other felt like a little bit more of a career track. When I interviewed for the position, my boss at the time described it to me as it will take probably 3 years for you to get the reins on this, for you to do all of the things and then for the full picture to click. And that felt like a lot. And I really wasn't sure. It ended up being that the decision was made for me. I had one offer, and that was for the hydrographer position in Newport. And so I said, great, let's give it a shot. And I started there in January of 2015 as a junior hydrographer. And since then, I've now been there, I cannot believe it, for 7 years. And I've sort of worked my way up, and now I'm a lead hydrographer there. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the work we do. I've definitely gotten exposure to a fair number of things, but primarily our bread and butter work that takes up the most of my time there is our contract work for NOAA. So I work for Leidos. Leidos is a really large corporation. I think when I started, there was 33,000 employees. And I want to say now there's probably a little over 40,000. It's pretty big. They have a headquarters in Reston, Virginia, that I've never been to. And I just work in the Newport office, and you would not know that it's part of a larger corporation if you went there. I work with a team of probably 10 to 15 people directly, maybe even less than that some days. So in our building, we probably have around 20 to 30 employees. I want to say there's our hydrographic team, a couple of miscellaneous roles, and then we have a software team downstairs. So as far as the hydrographic survey world is concerned, there's a handful of industry standard packages that people use for acquisition and processing that you might see on the Nautilus or other vessels. Leidos actually has their own proprietary software. So we use a software called ISS 2000 for acquisition, which is that whole screenshot on the left there. And then we use a software called Sabre for processing. And by and large, they all do the same things to the data. It's just a different interface that you're working with. So the software team downstairs works on both of those packages. And in addition to the hydrographic work that I do, I actually get to do some software testing as well. Which is nice because it mixes things up a bit. So right now, for example, we just delivered our NOAA work, and we're sort of in that weird interim time where we're waiting on where we're going to be next year. And so I'm working on software testing, which is a nice change of pace from what I've just been working on for the last few months. But in general, every year has the same blueprint, but is very different. We sort of go through, there's something called an IDIQ in place, which is basically a structure that allows a contract to be given in an easier way. And then every year there's an RFP that comes out that says, hey, we'd like you to survey here. It's these 5 polygons, this number of square nautical miles. Here you go. And then we have to take that, say, okay, this will cost this much. And take this amount of time and these resources and give it back to them. There's usually a little bit of back and forth. And then hopefully at the end of the day, after that, we get an award for a contract for where we'll be working. And since I've been there, I've been largely in the Gulf of Mexico. So NOAA has, different hydrographic health measuring tools where they'll assess US waters and US territories waters and say like where it needs to be mapped right now, what's our highest priority. And that could be somewhere that maybe hasn't been mapped since the 30s with a lead line, something that has been mapped with modern technology. Or it could be somewhere that's just an area with a lot of shifting shoals where the bathymetry is super variable. Or it could be an area where a hurricane just ripped through and there might be lots of wreckage, or it could be an area of high economic importance, hence the Gulf. So where I've been largely is just where there's a lot of oil and gas and there's a lot of new LNG facilities going in. And so NOAA being the agency responsible for the upkeep of nautical charts, that's an area that is high economic importance and high vessel traffic, commercial vessel traffic in particular. And it could always be a combination of any of those factors, but I would say I've spent most of my time in port in Galveston, Texas, a little bit in Port Arthur, not too much. Last year we were in Freeport, Texas, which I much prefer Galveston. Freeport just has a river that's lined with Dow Chemical and BSAF, and it's super industrial. I just hope you don't end up in Freeport, just in case anyone's from there. I'm just kidding, but and then a nice little break from the Texas work. We've also been out of Gulfport, Mississippi. So I don't know if anyone's been, there's a bunch of new facilities going into Gulfport. Some of you guys might have found your way there. And then we had a nice break where we were in the Chesapeake for a couple of years, mostly in the lower bay, working either out of Cape Charles or Norfolk, and a little bit in the mid bay working out of Maryland. And so every year has been different as far as when the contracts come through and when we actually start. But in general, we go through, we get an award and then we sort of start to move things along. So we have 2 containers that basically house our, and I wish I had a picture of them up right now. We have an acquisition van and a processing van, and it's just 2 ISO vans that you can place on the back of a boat. So it's sort of like, your survey in a box, and you can just put it on a vessel of opportunity. And, you need to know offsets and all sorts of things with that vessel. But I'm not going to say it's plug and play because it's way more complicated than that. But it's pretty cool that you can just put these containers on a different platform and roll with them that way. And so those actually live in a warehouse out back of our office in Newport, and we'll go through what's called a factory acceptance test, or FAT, to start the year out, where we run through any new software versions that exist, and sort of try to work out any of the kinks, while we're in the office and while we have people available to deal with them. And then once we call everything good there, we start to mobilize the vessel. The vans might go on the boat. And then we'll do what's called a sea acceptance test, or SAT, which is basically just a FAT on the water or dockside. And that's when you go out and you get all of your offsets verified, any bias values that you might need. And you sort of work through all that data and you call it good. And you say, okay, we're good to go survey. And then, like I said, usually it's just these random invisible polygons in an area, and we will survey those to whatever specification the contract says. So that could be object detection, where you're covering the bottom 200% twice over, looking for an object that's 1 by 1 by 1 meter. It could be complete coverage, where you might need to find an object that's 2 by 1 by 1 meter. It could be set line spacing, where you're sort of moving your survey lines based on the contours. Or it could be a combination of the two. Like last year, we had, a couple different specs. And then when you're out there, call it mowing the lawn, it's driving back and forth on a boat. Survey plans, say your lines are spaced 80 meters apart, you might be driving north on a line that's, however many meters long. You finish that line an hour later and you move 3 lines over and you drive south on a line 240 meters over, and then you move 3 lines over, and then you might come 5 lines back. And you just go back and forth. A day that I write a daily report that says survey was conducted on H12345, it's a very good day, because stuff's always happening. The equipment might break, the boat might break, both might break, one after the other. So it's always a busy survey season. There's usually something keeping you on your toes. A boring day is in general a good day. But that's kind of the gist of how it goes. We run with a multi-beam sonar mounted onto the bottom of the boat, or on a pole if we're on a small boat. And we usually tow a side scan sonar or have a bow mounted side scan sonar if it's a small boat. And so those are the 2 sonars that we're using. This is some multi-beam and side scan imagery on some of these photos. And really, we're just out there looking to see if there's any new, significant wrecks or any significant changes in bottom depth. And we're collecting data, and then we are processing that data in real time. So we usually work either on a big boat or a small boat, sometimes both at the same time. Our big boat is, 110 feet. It's not huge. But we'll have a survey team on there, a couple of people in acquisition, a couple of people in processing. It's 24/7 operations where you're either on day shift or night shift. And you're just collecting data continuously if you're able to, if the weather allows and the equipment allows. And so as far as travel goes, a leg on the big boat might be, on average, it's about 10 days with a travel day, a port call on either side. So you're either going to be traveling for a leg or you might be traveling for 2 legs. More often, I would say we travel for 2 legs. So you're gone I'm gone anywhere from week and a half, 2 weeks to 3 weeks, a little bit over. And the timeline is always varying. So I would say since I've started, I probably travel on average 60 to 90 days is what I say a year. But that's condensed within a 4 to 5 month period. So it's pretty busy at the time. Like once things start and you're gone for a leg, home for a leg, gone for 2 legs, home for a leg. It's a lot of back and forth. But I like it. It's good. It keeps things interesting. Sometimes it's to a different new place or Newport, and that's pretty cool. And then sometimes you might be on a small boat. So the small boat is intended for, shallower water up to, it's called the NAL, or the navigable area limit line, which for the purpose of this, I'll say is 3.5 meters, and sort of trace mapping out the shoreline to wherever, like once LiDAR stops being able to work. And that's just day ops. So that would be you're living in a hotel, essentially, possibly a house, and you're going out on the boat for a 12-hour day on the boat. So it's usually a little longer than 12 hours, but that's just collecting data on a 12-hour shift. And then you package it up on a hard drive and you bring it back to a field office, which is essentially the equivalent of our processing van on the boat. So processing is always happening, acquisition's always happening, and there's always a lot of data to work with. And so we're sort of just in the survey season, collecting data. We'll review it, see if there's any items that need investigation, like a shipwreck, or see if there's any gaps in the data based on whatever the specification defines a gap to be. And then we'll run items or holidays over those areas. And then after review of that, we'll call things good. And then it's time for demo. And there's a certain amount of time from when your last ping is collected, when you call your data good, to when it has to be delivered to NOAA. So that things can get on the chart in an adequate amount of time. And so we use that time to process in Newport, and that's when our sort of crunch time for delivery season is, which we just finished up a couple of weeks ago. And then there's caveats to that where, if we found a shipwreck that's huge and high and isn't on the chart, we can submit a danger to navigation, which has a way more fast-tracked pipeline. So, I've seen it where we'll submit something on a Tuesday, I know it processes it on a Wednesday, and it goes out in the next week's local notice to mariners, which is pretty cool. And that's always nice to see. And at the end of the day, this is just a photo of some deliverables. Basically, this is just it's a contract. So there's an award, this is what you have to do. You have to collect the data, and then you have to deliver certain things. And there's way more than what's on this screen, but this is just an example of some of the things that we might have to deliver. One of which is a bag, which is a bathymetric attributed grid, which is the surface, it's a gridded surface of all of the data that we've collected at a certain cell size resolution. And then there's all of the context and features, which is in a format called S57. It's a 000 file that's read in, we use Keras to read them. And that has all of these attributes that are attributed to certain objects or wrecks or things like that, pipelines. And that's sort of what you see on the left there. And then we'll sort of correlate things in a correlator sheet, which is on the right, which shows you, the kind of nice overall big picture of where it is on the chart and what does it look like in the grid and what does the side scan data look like that correlates to this object. And if it's an above water object, you might throw a photo in. And then there's a lot of other things that go on the hard drive and reports that go to NOAA. That's just sort of, it's an example of some of what we do at Leidos. There's a lot of other things that I've gotten to be a part of there as well. Like I mentioned earlier, working on some software testing now. And that's got some challenges, but it's also interesting. I like it. It's something different. I've tested our acquisition software, ISS 2000. I've tested our processing software, Sabre. Right now I'm working on testing ISS 60, it's called, which is similar to ISS 2000, but it's just what the Navy NavOceano uses for data acquisition of their hydrographic survey. And I've also gotten to do a little bit of work, not too much, but a little bit of work with some coal regs testing for autonomy. So I'm sure a lot of you guys know autonomy is coming into the world and coming in hot. And it's been interesting to see some coal regs testing and some of the progress that we've made. We even were able to do on a small boat. One of the sheets was partially collected in autonomous mode, which was pretty cool. And that was off of Texas. And then I think that's most of what I was going to cover today. There's a lot of other stuff that goes on. There's a lot of other, we formerly had processing work for NavOceano where we would just process data and not collect it. And there's always different things happening, but I kind of just wanted to touch a little bit on what it's like to work for, so we're a private company that does government contract work, right? So we're not federal employees. I'm an employee for a private company, but it's not in the research world. It's not in the academic world. It's, you know, I go into work and I have tasking. And for me, I personally like that. It works for me, and it's got stability to it. So yeah, I think with that, I'm gonna stop here and take any questions that you guys might have. I'm not sure where I am on time, but I think I'm close to 30. Okay, cool.